it kind of escalates out of the YA category in terms of graphicness, but in short stories, I find it a lot easier to kind of duck under the ratings radar.
Well, and I love the short story genre. That's a great thing about indie is that we can do that. We can put out short stories for kind of just for that quick read. Now, Laxmi, did we get sound for you finally? Oh no, still can't hear you. No. Technology. I don't know why. Oh, Pavardi. You're making him blush. Well, technical difficulties aside, I think the Uncommon Bodies anthology, obviously it's not YA, it's far from it, is going to be really fun to look at and maybe grab some people, and I wanted to show off the Kindle. It's got its skin, and then there's the other side. And that's what we're giving away for the launch, and it's got about 25 stories on it, some shorts and some novels, and we are going to give this away to people who review the book, who follow different accounts. There's a rafflecopter on the Uncommon Bodies event on Facebook that you can sign up to win this, and I'm jealous of the person that gets it because I would love to have something like this. It's pretty nifty. But YA, as I said, I'm not, it seems like YA sort of started up a few years ago all of a sudden. Everybody started calling it that. And I don't consider myself an expert on it because I really haven't read a ton of YA. But I have when I was YA, I did. And I was telling Laxmi before that some of the foundational things that made me want to write in sci-fi and fantasy are technically probably speculative YA. I think of the Dark is Rising series by Susan Cooper. And then I have a really all-time favorite book by a man named Richard Peck, who wrote this series of books about a young psychic ghost I have been in the 80s, and I adored them. That would qualify as YA. There was a story that I read, and people will laugh these days, called The Adventures of Holly Hobbie, which came out in the 80s when there was this huge Holly Hobbie, fad going on. But it's not sweet and innocent. It's actually about a ghost who comes back. It's magic realism. And they go on a quest to find the other narrator's father in the jungles of Guatemala. And that one is really kind of neat. Richard Doubleman read that. I also pulled up this big long list of Goodreads YA, and every single title on there, I look at it and I think, oh, I really want to read that. So I definitely, clearly, I need to get in there and get exploring. I've read Susan K. Quinn's books. She's got a nice YA series that is really neat in that it goes into kind of a Bollywood steampunk genre. And then Anne Christie, she's got a contemporary indie YA series. And Jen Foner Wells, she has some stuff that is not technically YA, but she publishes what she calls a clean version of it, of her novel. And so you could buy that and read the sci-fi aliens and First Contact and all of that. So I'm really interested in, looking into the genre more. What do you think, Jordanne? You said you have written a lot of it?
I've written a little bit. I've got one specific that was about 50 pages long, which is a pretty long short story. And that one was about a girl. It's also actually speculative fiction, where it's a young girl who has this deep family secret, and she is trying to figure out that while her experiencing her first day of school where absolutely everything was going wrong. And it's just interesting because the type of thing
A reboot always works.
Finally.
Reboot. I know, sometimes I want to reboot my life this way and get everything working, but there you go.
Yay.
Go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you, Jordan. Keep going.
No worries. But basically, it's interesting to explore the differences between how an adult would deal with that and how somebody in her first year of high school would deal with that, because he's also dealing with teenage brains, which I've done actually a lot of research on recently, where they don't have the capacity to handle the kind of decisions that adults make on a physical level. And so it's interesting trying to figure out how we would go about doing that while using a brain that's not technically our own, if that makes any sense. And so that's part of the reason I like exploring it. But this particular teenager, she gets made fun of and is ostracized like from the first day of school. And I felt like it kind of resonated because there's a lot of kids that are going through bullying, and I feel like it's a really hard-hitting topic right now. And it's another thing in young adult books that aren't really, or that really needs to be observed because of how much it's gone to the media these days and how bullied kids need to realize that they're not alone. The tune of more people are bullied than are bullies, I've noticed through different news articles. And that's another really big thing about YA that I find really interesting, because a lot of the time it's not just kids that get bullied, adults get bullied too. It's just considered harassment, or it's something that can be basically judged or stopped. Whereas kids, so it's kids being kids, so then the kids have to deal with condescending adults as well. And it's just interesting to try and figure it out from a child's like point of view.
Yeah, I think bullying is probably one of the really good categories that YA can help with, because with speculative, you can sort of imagine almost anything as an option, and you can get in there and you can imagine. It'd be neat to write a story imagining a world where, people felt empathy, sort of like the Blade Runner. I had to think about it. When they were bullied, they could push it into someone else. I mean, there's a lot of options for exploring how that could work. Pavarti said that her short novel, The 2 Moons of Sarah, is YA. That's actually on the Kindle too, so that'll be kind of a neat little addition. Christopher, you said you don't really do a lot with YA. Do you? What do you think about these? I'm sorry, 2 Moons of Sarah is a full novel. Okay, good, awesome. I haven't read it yet. I need to. Moon Dust is on the Kindle. I messed that up, so don't listen to me. I don't know what I'm talking about. I had 24 to load yesterday, and I'm going to forget. I'm a flake. So I kind of want to get everybody's voice in here. Laxmi, I guess you haven't really introduced yourself or talked because we didn't have your audio. So let's get you in.
No, that's fine. And actually, I'm going to jump in with a question. This whole YA versus NA thing, it's because my protagonists are always 18. They're on the cusp of becoming full-grown adults, and I tend to treat them like adults, and I get told off a lot for that. Am I echoing as well?
You just did a second ago. It might have been not you, but a little feedback from Jordan trying to figure out her thing.
Okay, so the whole YA versus new adult question is something I think about quite a lot. I hesitate calling my novels NA because I'm told NA means sex, and my novels don't have any gratuitous sex. They do have a lot of violence. They have a lot of blood. They're very much in that sort of Kill Bill space, I would think. But and I do have older protagonists. But it makes me wonder whether So what is NA? What is NA, Kim? What do you think? What would you classify as new adult?
New adult, I think that is more to, the idea is that they are exploring issues from somewhere around 18 and above. That's why you can have sex in there, which I think Twilight, for example, it really falls more into new adult than young adult, but it gets put in YA a lot. Now I'm echoing from somewhere.
And I also think that, another thing to consider is that different countries have different ideas of what's graphic content and what isn't. Like in America, you can have all the violence you want, seemingly, like in a PG-13 movie, but, if somebody crosses a seemingly, arbitrary line as far as sexual content, all of a sudden it gets rated R. Where in other countries where they're not so ashamed of their bodies as we are here, it's the sexual content kind of gets taken for granted, where the violence, everybody, kind of stands up and takes notice. So I think there's some gray area, and I'm kind of a big fan of just, writing what you want to write and then let other people categorize it, so to speak. Because they're going to anyway, so let them do their job.
Exactly.
So is that why you think we're all attracted to speculative fiction? Because you can write what you want, you can go across genres, and you don't have to worry about calling it by a name. That is what attracts me, because I struggled for a long time to understand what it is I was writing, because I seem to go across so many different genres. And I end up calling a lot of my books dystopia, for a lack of a better word. I think dystopia is the safe word for speculative YA. But I'd love to go right out there at some point in the future and say, well, actually what I write is speculative NA. Did you hear that? That's your ghost in the machine.
I know. We're having some sort of issue. I don't think it's me. I have a new microphone, but it could be. I seem to be coming.
I have 7 mics hooked up to my PC, so I don't even know which one to talk into, but I'm just trying to speak clearly, and hopefully whichever one's working picks it up fine.
So Pav says dystopia is hot right now, and that's again really interesting for me, because I have mainstream publishers and mainstream published authors tell me dystopia is over, but I'm saying no, it's not over, because when I look online, I find a thriving community around dystopia and what dystopia means. But then it comes to the point of saying, well, actually, it doesn't matter whether it's over or not, because and it's about everybody. So Chris, yeah, you're right. It's everyone being fearful that the world is coming to an end. So yeah, I don't think dystopia is going to go away anytime soon. Do you, Chris?
Yeah, it's kind of the whole, Stephen King had that thing where he was talking about zombies versus vampire stories or movies. At times of economic prosperity, one of them becomes more popular, and then when economic times drop, the other ones become more popular. So zombies are more popular when the economy's in the toilet, and vampires are more popular when the economy's doing well, because, everybody's scared, when the economy takes a dive. So they start looking at, end time scenarios, and zombies fit in well with that. So it's kind of a subconscious thing, but, you can, if you get the information together and the data, you can really, start making some corollaries.
Yeah, I guess, the zombie genre sort of starts off the modern incarnation of it with the Night of the Living Dead and the mall, the whole rampant consumer spending critique. And so they eat everything because they have to consume, even the brains. And it's mindless. That's why they have to eat the brains. There's a really neat writer that publishes that it probably would fall into NA. Mira Grant, if anybody's ever read her, she does zombie fiction. And yeah, I'm thinking, I guess that's why it's hard to categorize the difference between YA and NA and adult. I mean, some adult is obvious, but once you get past a certain age, what's your audience and what are you talking about? Late teens, Pavardia, an underhanded way to write erotica. Yeah, maybe, because you're allowed to put sex in it and talk about that. Like I said, Twilight has that. In the last book of Twilight, they get married and make that little odd baby. I was
obligated to do it at that point, though.
Obligated, right? They're married, right? So, and I think that tension is one of the reasons too. Like in romance, there's a lot of different genres of romance. Some of them where they really get down and dirty, and then some where it's always the tension has to stay there, and they never can get busy and
They stare at
make
each other
that happen.
longingly for 400 pages.
Yeah, yeah, and you're like, oh, just do it already. So, but I mean, sci-fi to me feels like a genre where vampire has got the Vampire Diaries, Twilight, all of those books on Amazon with the guy with a hairless, naked chest and the wolf in the background. All of those are probably urban fantasy and probably YA and NA. I mean, they sure sell well.
And I really liked the thing you mentioned earlier about, since a lot of us are indies, we can. I really like the idea. Actually, I should just cut to it. About writing different versions of the same story, like cutting out the graphic content and things like that, and just republishing a story as a YA novel. And if your novel's strong enough to where you can do that, just take out like a sex scene and it becomes a YA novel, then that's, I think, what you're really after. You want to write a story that anybody can read, but maybe there's a couple scenes or a couple lines of dialogue that aren't really appropriate for younger audiences.
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, in my first novel, Mariposa, I started off writing that thinking it was going to be urban fantasy, like the Sookie Stackhouse vampire, Southern vampire that became True Blood. And that's what I intended to write. And so my protagonist is a ghost, and I needed her to get lucky really early in the book because, ghosts, who knows what ghosts can get up to. So I have a fairly tame scene somewhere around page 15 or so. And I was afraid didn't have the courage of my own convictions there, I guess, and that people would get upset with that. And so I probably had her apologize for fooling around a little too much. That's one of the reviewers said that. And I was like, oh man, I didn't mean to do that. And then it shifted into a book that was really more kind of straight up magic realism. And I think that I could take that scene out. And well, there's one other scene that would be a little more, see, that's the thing, sex and violence. There's a violent scene in there that if I took out would just crush the book. But I could probably take out the romantic a little bit, and then it could be more YA. I mean, the critic said she doesn't read YA, so she didn't quite get my book. Well, it's not YA, but that's an interesting. And do people notice
so what
those?
Did you call it? Well, how did you classify it?
I think it's probably more NA than YA, if it's anything. I mean, I meant it to be adult, but the protagonist is 23. There's two protagonists. Both of them are 23 in the story, and then the males are all in that age range approximately. So that's probably, that's when we're figuring things out. You just finished college, maybe you're getting married. You're for sure probably having that first really serious long-term relationship, most people. And some people are having kids at that age. So that's I think maybe that's pushing it into more grown-up stuff to be starting the family and that. But it's not coming of age, but it's becoming an adult, I guess. And so that's why you can work that romance in there.
Yeah, the romance is all YA, but when the kids come, you have to be an adult. So Right. No more sleep. That's when the gray hairs all start, and then you right. Yeah. And like you said, the whole YA versus anything they have, like the Hunger Games is considered YA, which has a ton of violence in it.
Oh yeah,
not a lot of sex.
yeah. Right at the end, I guess. I'm trying to remember.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Laxmi.
No, so I was going to ask, when has speculative fiction as a genre been around for a while? And is it just me who has discovered it and is so excited about it? I can't stop telling people about it. So maybe we start with Jordanne. When did you first hear about speculative fiction?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, that's better.
Awesome. Okay. Actually, with the first one of these, that's when I first really noticed that people were talking about it, and then I realized that it was like that Kavardi and all the rest of the authors, and you guys were all talking about it in the group for talking about the anthology, and that's when I was like, wait a minute, this is a genre, and then I looked it up. I actually looked up the meaning of it 10 minutes before this started. So I didn't know it was a genre. I saw kind of little bits about it in the group again, and people were kind of describing it, but I didn't actually have a concrete, like, meaning of what it was. And so about 10 minutes before this when I knew what it encompassed. And that's also when I realized that my story in Uncommon Bodies isn't likely considered speculative fiction because there's no mystical at all in it. It's just a success story, inspiration for people who have been in abusive situations and who are trying to kind of find ways out of it or find ways to heal themselves or to talk to people and things like that. So it's just funny because I didn't realize that I had no idea what it was. So today.
I think speculative is the big category, and all of the stuff that a lot of people that are my favorite indie writers are writing fits in that. So sci-fi fits in there, space opera fits in there, horror even can fit in there. Then magic realism, that's another subcategory. And a lot of times, having that magic as part of the story stands in for something else, like, in power or independence or whatever you can think of. And that's one of the ways that it's speculative. It's speculating on what could happen, what could happen next.
Right. And I realized that all of my other stories that I've written this entire year do fall under that.
Yeah. Concretely.
Whereas this one, I could try and find ways that it would, but it's more realism than anything. It's just textbook girl who's been through years of abuse does a not so common thing of getting her body entirely covered in tattoos.
Yeah.
Which is something that could happen in our world. It would be really sad, and I'm sure that it has happened in our world where people have suffered the amount of abuse she has throughout her life, but it's not something that is speculative in the sense that it's an interesting scenario that would not likely ever happen. It's actually quite possible and probably has.
Cool. So, did you have something you want to say?
No, I was going to say, Chris, what about you? When did you first hear about speculative fiction?
So I've been familiar with speculative fiction for a while. I have, I think, probably every 3 to 6 months, a pretty lengthy online discussion with another author about the differences between where the line for speculative fiction ends and, which in science fiction begins and where all the whole kind of nebulous, edges of everything are. And I think I had one a month or two ago with Daniel, one of the other authors, about science fiction, speculative fiction, magical realism. Actually, that was what it was. I think it was magical realism versus science fiction.
Yeah.
And, I, being primarily a science fiction author, take the stance of, kind of defending science fiction for everybody. But, I don't know if we ever actually came to a consensus, but, magical realism is something that is a genre that I've recently, I think you guys introduced me to the fact that our collection was magical realism. And I was like, oh, what's magical realism? Apparently I need to read up on this too. So, my story is very firmly science fiction. I haven't had a chance to read everybody else's yet, but I kind of understand the general idea of magical realism, and speculative fiction is something I'm a little more familiar with.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
What would you think? Hard sci-fi. Because I do sci-fi too, and they asked me. I did an interview with Pavarti that'll come out probably after Thanksgiving about my story in the Uncommon Bodies is about a cyborg girl assassin, but she's also undead. So there's your magic element. And right. I don't really write super duper sci-fi in that way, but that's what I read. And that's one of the things that I am really find important as a writer is I want to write books that I also want to read. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of been my favorite thing that most authors say. They go out and they don't find a book that they want, so they think, wouldn't it be neat if this happened? And yeah, so that's
and I'm the same way. I'm a huge, science and, geek. So my stories, they're not so far off. They're more like usually set 20 to 30 years in the future. So the world kind of looks a lot like it does now. I try not to fall into the trap that we did in the 50s where, by the year 2010, we're going to have flying cars and everything. I try to keep it more grounded into, gadgets and electronics and stuff like that, that we'll, and it's more about the escape of a reality that's becoming more and more dystopic. And those are the stories that, and I want everything to be able to, I want somebody to, at base level, be encouraged to go and read more about the technology that's actually being produced right now. So I try and base everything in my books on actual science. Even if I'm extrapolating it a little bit into the future, I try to do it so that somebody can say, okay, well, this exists in a lab, but this is 20 years in the future where everybody kind of takes it for granted that you can see augmented reality through your contact lenses and stuff like that. So,
let me ask a question. I have a question for Chris on that. So, when you speak about sci-fi and grounding sci-fi in some kind of a real tech, so I get that, and I'm a science student myself, and that's sort of almost why I don't write hard sci-fi. But what I'm attracted more and more is sci-fi meets spirituality, which I think is kind of magic realism in that space. Because I think for me, there is a very fine line between technology and the unseen, because technology makes the unseen possible, but then what you call magic is as well the unseen. And, and I'm calling it spiritual, but actually what it is the unseen. So I think it's really, that's the reason why I think I end up writing more as magic realism, because it's almost like you can push the barriers so much more because you're almost not even constrained by science. But more often than not, what I find is whatever I do write as magic realism is something that probably technology or genetic engineering is probably going to make possible. So in a strange way, they all kind of come together. I don't know. Would you all agree? Does anyone have any comment on that?
I think that the whole idea of I kind of lost my train of thought there, but the whole idea of where you can take things to a limit, the difference between how far you can push magical realism versus how far you can push science fiction, I completely agree with you there. When you start getting into more of the magical elements, you can kind of make up your own rules as long as they stay consistent through the whole story. Where the reason I choose to ground everything in my novels and actual research and everything is that I just really enjoy connecting the dots, so to speak, from what we have today towards what it could be tomorrow. And I understand that, I'm kind of falling into the whole, trap of potentially dating my work in the future if things go a different way. Kind of like some of the big science fiction authors of today, like a lot of people who wrote cyberpunk back in the 80s and 90s are coming up against that, where, a lot of the stuff that they kind of prophesize, so to speak, like Neil Stephenson's pizza delivery scenes at the beginning of Snow Crash, nobody really delivers pizzas in giant souped up cars. It's usually college kids in their Honda Civics. So, but it's at some point, I think you have to kind of take those chances if you want to be a science fiction author. And in magical realism, I think it does give you more freedom, to explore things and just kind of take your story wherever you want it to go. And you also kind of get the also added benefit of being able to, kind of sidestep chronology down the road when that future catches up to your story.
Yeah, and Jordanne, you spoke about soft sci-fi. So how do you define soft sci-fi?
Well, soft sci-fi is when you have more of a magical situation towards it. Like, it's not like very hard facts, not like there's some sort of elements of magic, or you're taking it more to a level of stuff you've made up or stuff you've speculated about instead of stuff that is well known. So, like, for example, it'd be like Doctor Who is more of a soft sci-fi, whereas Star Trek is more of a hard sci-fi, because in Star Trek they have a lot more facts, they have a lot more is dedicated to their technology and their specific scientific side of the sci-fi, whereas a soft sci-fi is more of the fictional part. It's more of the what if and the philosophies and the theories behind scientific research versus the actual studies. At least that's what I've read.
Yeah.
And so my story has like it has well, I have one story. This is a different story where I won't spoil the entire thing by telling you what the sci-fi element is of it. And it's the novel that I'm working on. I've got another short story called Dusk that is the prequel to it. It's a standalone young adult prequel, actually, that goes to an adult novel series. And it's a soft sci-fi because it is basically it's stuff that I've made up, and it's a post-apocalyptic steampunk society type world where I've made up my own kind of futuristic technology that uses steam tech to work. So I have my own generators and like energy supplying machines that I've created myself that would work in our society but are completely unreasonable. But it would work if you had to. But it's not grounded in scientific research. It's a make-believe thing that kind of lends itself to science.
Well, like I think of like Andy Weir's The Martian. That's kind of hard sci-fi. Some of the science is just so compelling, but he obviously knows a lot about that stuff. I have a short fiction, not a novel, that takes place on another planet, but it was inspired by taking an astronomy course and finding out that this one planet, Venus, I'm just going to say it. It's a spoiler, but it rotates the opposite way of the Earth. And so on Venus, it would be Romeo, Juliet is arising in the West. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And so I wrote this short story about Venus as a result. And I did the research and I did all the science and I tried to get it right. And then, you have space exploration, spaceships taking off, and how would they do that? So I looked at aviation science and kind of borrowed from that and tried to get it right, because there's nothing worse to me than a sci-fi novel where you're like, oh God, that wouldn't happen. Like Independence Day, right? Where they go up and they upload a virus to a completely alien computer software. You're like, oh my God, my suspension of disbelief just broke, It was What was that?
Science with the water.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, of course that would damage them, right? I still love that movie, though. I think it's just, what's his name, that actor? Joaquin.
Joaquin Phoenix.
Yeah, he's so neat. He's cute. I'm sorry, I go off into weirdness.
Kim, you said something earlier, which is again interesting, this whole reading versus writing. So I've got to say, until I started writing, I didn't think of myself as a fantasy or sci-fi or, anywhere half as speculative as what I am right now. I used to read romances, right? Because I grew up in a society where Mills and Boon was very popular. So I read a lot of trashy romance growing up. But then when I started writing, it seemed like what I was writing was much more into fantasy space. And I'd read a lot more of sort of, I would say, soft sci-fi, fantasy, YA, much more YA than anything, which is what I write. But do you really think what you write, that there needs to be synchronicity between what you write and what you read? I mean, does that really need to happen?
I think it just naturally happens. I mean, I remember I teach literature, so I'll have students come up and say, I don't really like to read, but I want to be a writer. And I'll be like, what? You have to read. You have to read. I was just putting myself in the nose. You have to read to be a writer. You have to think of, read everything there possibly ever was to read, from Shakespeare and Beowulf and Canterbury Tales to smutty romance. Thank God for smutty romance. My grandmother read it every single day of her life. 80-year-old woman had like 300 romance books in her bedroom because romance readers, that's what they do. They read a book a day. And that's an amazing genre. And I think that you have to read it. And if you're reading it, you're going to write it. And you're going to write, and you're going to have that drive to do the same thing, to put your thoughts out there, to think about, oh, that's a neat story, but how would I explore it? And I just think that's, writers, when we are able to, we have this little, I'm going to get speculative fiction on you. We have this little pathway into the collective unconscious, which is that whole, all the ideas that ever happened and will ever happen, this sort of religious, mystic idea of where ideas come from, because I'm kind of a Jungian. And we just have this pathway to get in there, and these stories really need to be told, and they want to be told. And if you don't tell it, and you don't tell it, and you don't tell it, then someone else is going to. And occasionally I get a book and I read it and I go, oh man, that was my idea. I should have written that because I would have done it so much better, or probably not, but that's where they come from, I think. And as a reader, that's what I want. I've read a bazillion great literature books. I have a PhD in that mess. But what my passion is always speculative sci-fi, sometimes horror, not as much, but Stephen King is all of those things. I just, that's where I keep going over and over again. That's what my dissertation is on. And people go, really? You wrote a dissertation on Buffy the Vampire Slayer? And I'm like, oh, one chapter. One chapter on her.
And I think as writers, we kind of have a responsibility to read a bunch of different genres and kind of pull that into, our genre of choice. I've read a ton of romance novels. I've read, everything short of, country and Western stuff, just because I had to watch a ton of those shows growing up because my father was into it. So I'm kind of burnt out on that whole thing. But
Louis L'Amour, I think I've read some of that a little.
Yeah. I think you kind of have to pull things like, because your stories are supposed to be about life. So if you're just writing about the gadgets and, the technology and stuff, you're kind of losing the broader picture of what's happening to the characters. You need, they're going to go through romances. So in order to become a better, writer for those scenes, that you should read some romance novels so that you understand, the way other people have explored those, emotions and stuff in the past, and you can kind of pull that into your writing.
Yeah. I think often, well, at least for me, perhaps I tend to stop myself more when I write. There's this a part of me that says, well, just follow your instinct and write what you love, write the way you want it to be. And then there's this other part, my right brain, that goes, well, but you've got to follow the rules. You've got to try and keep it within a certain genre. Don't go too out there. If you go too out there, you're going to lose readers. They're not going to know what you're talking about. And so I have this sort of internal conflict at one level somewhere here happening, and I'm still sort of writing, and there's this part of me from here that goes, just write it, just get it out. And then there's this part of me here that's like pulling me back. And I guess, but then that's kind of what the writing process is about. You kind of do that push and pull often enough, and maybe you find your balance. You find that sort of fine edge where you're still sort of pure and you've got your voice coming through, but then it's in a way that more people can understand you. Because, I think that's why I'm kind of grateful to have found speculative fiction as a home, because I find it gives me perhaps more permission to experiment and not having to, always stick to a genre or sort of keep censoring myself. Because I have to say, my biggest fear is that people won't get what I'm writing. And I wonder if that's just a reflection of me in real life, where I just worry that, people just won't get me. But I don't know, is that similar for y'all, or is it, what do y'all think?
I've kind of accepted myself as a social pariah, so I just I mean, I accept that I'm misunderstood generally. So I just you'll be reading my
it's out there now.
So you'll be reading my science fiction book, Predomain, the novel, and a few chapters in, you stumble on a couple of scenes which are fairly hardcore erotica, and it's not that I consciously decided that that it needed it. It's just where the story went, and I try very hard to make the promise to myself that if I get to a point where I think something's going to happen, I don't do we cut away at this point and go to somewhere else. I tell that part of the story too, and I kind of force. And sometimes it's just because I want the reader to be uncomfortable. I feel like if they need to be uncomfortable at that point, then I'm going to show and tell more than maybe a lot of other science fiction authors might at that point, just to kind of twist the knife a little bit, and then it's off onto something else. But I try very hard not to, and like you said, I try. When I was first starting out, I had a lot of those voices in my head going, well, you need to write to genre, you need to, stay within these lines, where this is what people are expecting when they, if they're searching for a science fiction book, then they're not going to want an explicit sex scene in the middle of this because they're there for the science fiction. And I kind of had to get over that in my own mind where, because I think that's a lot of what happens when you hit writer's block and things like that, is you're kind of pushing back against the story that you want to write. And you're trying to figure out a way to do, instead of just letting it flow and letting it just kind of that old adage, you just open a vein onto the page or whatever they say. Instead of just letting it go and then, fixing it in post or how they say, you're trying to fit it within a certain thing, a certain genre or certain, timelines and stuff like that. And I think that's where a lot of the difficulties come, and when people fall into writer's block.
Yeah, I haven't heard that one before. Open a vein under a page, did you say?
Yeah, I said, I can't remember. It's a quote somewhere like open a vein and bleed onto the page again, or something like that.
Anyways, writing is easy. All you do is get a typewriter and bleed or something like that. Yeah. So it's
maybe that's what it was.
Similar sentiment. Similar. I think Jordanne said earlier, or maybe it was I forget who, I lose track, but somebody said earlier about, trying all these different genres and not fitting in sci-fi or not fitting in any particular one and being glad to find speculative. That's one of the things I think that indie publishing does for us, because we don't have some publishing house saying, oh no, you're a sci-fi writer. You can't put erotica in there. And you put it in there if you want to. And if people like it, they like it. I mean, maybe you won't get $1 million book contracts. I don't know. But for me, what I'm writing for is for enjoying the story, writing for the people who are interested in reading my story. And I'm not going to be Stephen King, I don't think. I mean, I don't have the heart of a young man in my car like he says he does. I don't remember the quote. The body of a young man, something like that. Desk. Yeah, exactly. I don't have that. Well, I have 2 of them upstairs, but I let them roam free most of the time.
I work 5 minutes away from his house, so I'm kind of a student of his stuff. So
I love his work. I mean, and it's probably when I try to write horror because Mariposa has a couple of, it's about ghosts, so it's got a couple of dark, murdery scenes, and I'm sure that I think when I wrote Hoodoo Apocalypse, one of the bad scenes in that is someone being bad. Oh, there's my daughter. Hello, Maya. And one of my beta readers was like, why did you put it all in all caps in italics? I was like, well, because that's what Stephen King does. So I did that for that reason. But you're just going to read these foundational writers and you're going to be influenced by them. And you got to turn that inner critic off, I think, because you won't write. you won't keep going because you'll think, oh, what if someone doesn't like it? If they don't like it, they can put it down,
Right.
That's actually something that one of my mentors, and one of my favorite authors, said to me was, just keep writing. Don't look at it. Don't even look at your spelling mistakes. Just put it all on the page because you can go back later. Now, this guy will write 1,000-page books and then scale it back to 700. And he's like an epic fantasy writer. He's amazing. But I really took away that from that, to know that I should keep going. Don't stop. And I can agree with that. And I think that's kind of important.
Yeah, I'm awful in the way that I hate to like waste words, and I know that's awful compared to the way a lot of people write. A lot of people are just like you said, they'll just get it out and then they'll fix it later. And where I'm not a full-time author, I think I can, and kind of as a result that, as a byproduct, I'm also a single father. So I have a lot of demands on my time. So sometimes I have to put stuff away and just kind of walk away from it. So I've gotten into the habit of, if something just doesn't feel like it's going the right way, or if it just kind of feels, I don't know if disingenuous, I guess the right word for it. It just feels like I'm not being true to what the characters would do in that instance. I'll just set it down because I always have other stuff to do. And, a lot of people say you have to write every day if you're an author, which, to a certain extent I kind of agree with. But I also think that not everybody's got the same process. And I think that a lot of times, because even if you're not actually putting words on the page, you're still thinking about your story. And I think being a writer, to me, the litmus test is you can't not write. Even if you give it a week or two, or, even 24 hours or something, you always come back to it. You can't not do it. The stories kind of back up in your head, and to the point where, you just I just got to sit down and write something just to get it out, And sometimes I do it on social media. I'll just drop a scene. Like if I'm out getting groceries or something and I'm just like, I get this idea for a scene or whatever, I'll just write it and post it to Facebook, just kind of quotation marks, block it off and just post it up there and, put a hashtag on it so I can find it later, or drop it in my Evernote or something like that. But, maybe it's just my general laziness. I don't love writing a ton of words that I don't feel like I'm going to use.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of other authors that works great for them. And, they can write, like Jordanne said, 1,000 words and trim it back to 700. And that's like fingernails on a chalkboard to me. I'm just like, I can't do that.
I took out about 70,000 words out of Mariposa. And it was mostly just description.
70 or 17? 770?
70. It was a lot. And it was mostly description that I didn't need. And I think I tend to kind of overwrite what the room looks like because I'm just really in that place. So that needed to come out for sure.
Yeah.
I noticed that we're getting close to the end of the hour. And so I'm going to remind everybody that the big point today was to talk about Uncommon Bodies, which is, get it up there, launching this week. You can buy it already on Amazon. You can pre-order it, and it's coming out in paperback. The paperback, Pavarti left, but she's doing amazing things with the paperback. I can't wait to get my copy. And it's a lot of different stories about different types of people, lots of range. There's a little that you could call erotica in there. There's sci-fi. There's some YA-ish stories. And so there's poetry. And so it's a really neat anthology. And if it keeps going, if it gets a lot of good attention, we might, with different authors jumping in, do more. So that's coming and it's launching. So please, if you haven't grabbed a copy yet, go check it out. See what you think of it. I think it's going to be exciting and it's going to be a neat anthology. Come to our launch party. You can look on any of our websites and Twitter and see where that is. It's on Facebook. It's coming on Tuesday, and there'll be a lot of giveaways and fun chat. Not video chat this time, but fun reviews on Goodreads. There's a couple of reviews on Goodreads. Hopefully there'll be more as soon as the Create Space lets the links on Amazon. So it's getting good reviews already. People are really liking it. And it's going to places. There's a lot of speculative and sci-fi anthologies out there already, but this one is exploring kind of more twisted perspectives. Like it says, you might not get out alive on one of the taglines. It's like the Carney of anthologies, I think. Lots of different takes on the stuff. We also wanted to mention that next week we're going to do this again. And I think Laxmi, you were saying maybe steampunk, which is something that I
that'd be funk. And I've just put up the link to the Facebook party.
Excellent.
On the 24th for Uncommon Bodies. So do join us there. You'll find all of us, all the 4 of us there, and many other authors. And next Saturday, same time, we're going to continue talking nerdy. And I have to say, this is the high point of my week. I mean, I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that I had an hour on Saturday just to be able to talk this stuff with people. I mean, I don't know what that says about me, but there you go. So I'm looking forward to next Saturday already.
Really
I know, I do.
Yeah.
I own it proudly.
You want to talk about books and writing? Are you kidding me? I mean, I cleaned my office. See how clean it is now?
Amazing.
And boxes everywhere. And I thought, I need like a clean office space for this so people don't think I'm a complete loser.
Like you invite people over as an excuse to clean your house.
Right. Yeah. So it's kind of fun. And I'm having a great time with this. And I hope that we continue to get a few followers. I think last week we had like 7 people pop in. And today we
have up to 36 people watching us, which is huge. Great. It's a record. So thanks to everybody who's watching. And next Saturday, steampunk. Yeah, sounds fun.
That would be fun. I haven't written a steampunk story, but I love it. And I have debates about steampunk and diesel punk. You know, they've got that out there and all the different punks. So I like punks. So we'll definitely be talking about that and winning the Nerd Award. So Laxmi, you got the Nerd Award today.
I love it. Thank you.
You get a little statue printed up or something. Yeah. Nerd of the Week t-shirt, maybe. Well, thank you guys for stopping by, and hopefully we'll get some more visitors that will come again and listen to what we have to say. So thanks, and I guess that's the hour. Peace out.
Yeah. Bye.
All right, I'm going to stop recording.